Good morning. Western militaries and governments now face severe supply chain problems as a result of the war in Ukraine, which has depleted European and American ammunition stocks. And now China has put a ban on many of the raw materials needed to rearm. Here is the math. Ukraine needs over 4 million artillery shells a year to perform their missions on the battlefield. The United States produces at a rate of 432,000 shells per year. Even if every single one of those shells we build is sent to Ukraine, along with all the production from NATO countries, we can only provide half of what Ukraine needs to continue the war. Russia right now produces 3 million artillery shells a year and will produce at least 4 million this year. A key challenge for us is right here. The relationship between China and Russia is strong. China has the supply chains for raw materials and is the world's most productive industrial economy. And Russia is already expert at producing artillery and shells anyway. And Moscow has turned Ukraine into a war of attrition instead of maneuver, which also plays to their strengths there. Having friends in Beijing means that the West might not be able to catch up, even if the war ends tomorrow. This news here is somewhat comforting on its face. Ukraine produces 40% of what it uses on the battlefield. And in the 2-year period, 2023 and 24, Ukraine tripled their production of artillery systems, increased APC manufacturing 5 times, doubled anti-tank weapons, and 2.5 times on ammunition. But the reality on the front lines tells a different story. Here's the math again. Ukraine is far outstripping NATO's current production capacity and draining our own arsenals. Ukraine's armor production is often just taking old Soviet equipment and upgrading it. Ukraine's munitions industry cannot produce or deliver simple weapons, and without United States help, Ukraine has very low chance of surviving the war. Publicly, their strategic industries is saying that things are improving, that Ukraine already produces half of its artillery ammunition last year and will make almost all of it for 2025, including NATO standard shells. Here we see, though, what Ukrainian troops themselves are saying. The shells are no good, they're low quality, and even though most of the ammunition that reaches the front lines are Ukraine-made, Ukrainian troops don't like to work with them. They're scared to use them. Recently, Ukraine had to recall 30,000 defective mortar shells because somewhere in the chain, powder was being taken out of the shells, meaning that they blow up closer to Ukrainian troops than to Russian forces. So Ukraine is trying to get ammunition from wherever it can. The United States, Poland, Italy, and the India angle to the story is interesting enough that we'll do a standalone report on it in a few days. But Ukrainian shells are trash despite the money spent on the industry. Russian arms production is a completely different story. The Russian economy is less than a tenth the size of the United States or the European Union, but Russia easily produces more than the entire West, that's the US and Canada and the EU combined, in the key weapons and supply systems. So the dilemma facing policymakers and defense ministers in the EU and in the US is that the ground war that we're supporting in the Ukraine is bleeding dry our stockpiles of weapons systems and ammunitions. That was the problem in November 2024 when this analysis was done, and this was from June of last year. 2 events of huge import have made the situation in Europe even worse since then. This whole piece from 22 November involves the question of what happens next, given that the United States seems fine to walk away from the European mess and focus on our own problems, and what that means for Europe. And since mid-2024, the US is only much farther down that road. So Europe faces some hard choices about rearmament, support for Ukraine, building their own defense apparatus, all without the United States. There is no good news coming out of Washington these days for the defense challenges that Europe is facing now that they're on their own. The news from Beijing is pretty bad too, if we assume that Europe's plan is to manufacture their own weapons systems and the ammunition for them, because China and their closest allies and trading partners own the supply chains to build weapons systems and the ammunition for them. Antimony is one of those things, and now there's a global shortage of antimony. China has new and very strict export controls on dual-use raw materials and technologies. Dual-use meaning that they have military as well as civilian applications. Antimony mining and production is dominated by China and Russia. And the export restrictions on antimony caused a quadrupling of antimony prices. Antimony and lead are used in bullets, explosives, shrapnel weapons, cluster munitions. All of that needs to be replaced, and supply chain guys don't know what to do. Global demand of antimony is 120,000 tons per year. Global production is 80,000 tons per year. And China, Russia, and Tajikistan produce 87% of the world's antimony supply. Put another way, we need antimony to make high explosives. We need to produce lots of high explosives if we're going to replenish our own supplies, plus whatever we send to the Ukraine. Ukraine is taking those high explosives to shoot at Russians, and now Russia and China are cutting off global antimony supplies. This is Tongren City in Guizhou. Be good.
Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things